The town of Briarfield didn't welcome outsiders with open arms. It nodded from behind screen doors, watched from porches, and whispered when backs were turned. Cassie Winters arrived unnoticed, just the way she preferred. A one-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop. No photos on the walls, no forwarding address. The shooting range sat just outside town limits, past the scrapyard and the silent train tracks. Its faded red sign read, Briarfield Gun Club, established, bin dokus yuz yetmish iki inside. It smelled of oil, metal, and memory. Cassie stood in the doorway for a beat too long. "Can I help you?" The man behind the counter had a sunburned face and a voice like gravel. She nodded. "I'd like to try the range." He glanced her up and down. Slender, soft-spoken, no calluses on her hands. "You ever shot before?" "A long time ago," she said. Her fingers fidgeted inside her coat pocket. Not fear, habit. "Name?" "Cassie. Cassie Winters." He scribbled it down. "You'll need a waiver. Lane 3's open." The room buzzed with distant chatter and the pop-pop of live fire. At the far end, a group of regulars circled one woman. Tall, blonde, confidence dripping off her like sweat. That was Brielle. Everyone knew her name, even Cassie, though she'd only been in town 5 days. "Let me guess," Brielle called across the range, eyes narrowing as she caught sight of the newcomer. "You're here for a selfie with a rifle?" The men around her laughed. Someone added, "Might break a nail, sweetheart." Cassie didn't respond. She approached lane 3 and picked up the borrowed .22 rifle. Her hands trembled, not from nerves, but from the cold that had settled in her bones long ago. She lined up the target, inhaled, fired, missed. A chuckle echoed from lane 1. Brielle again. "Cute." Cassie lowered the rifle and stared at the target, unblinking. Her face gave away nothing, but inside, something curled tight, like a trigger half pulled. She fired again, missed again. By the third shot, the laughter had faded into disinterest. But Cassie wasn't aiming to impress. She was learning the weight, the recoil, the distance. She adjusted her stance, corrected her grip, fired one last time, still a miss. She returned the rifle without a word and left the range in silence, ignoring the sidelong glances, the smirks. She walked back to her apartment through the biting wind, her face expressionless, but her knuckles white. In her bag were photos, old ones. One showed a man teaching her how to shoot in the woods. Another, crumpled, showed the same man with a bruised cheek and a hand on her shoulder. She slid them back inside the envelope and locked them in the drawer. Tomorrow, she would return to the range. Not to win, to remember, to reclaim, and maybe, just maybe, to make someone like Brielle eat her laughter. Cassie returned the next morning, and the next, and the next. She arrived with the same neutral expression, the same threadbare coat, the same quiet determination. She never spoke unless spoken to, never smiled, never flinched at the sound of gunfire. She just watched, listened, learned. Her shots, once wide and wild, began to tighten. A shaky rhythm became a steady pulse. Breath in, fire, breath out. She adjusted her stance with each session, read manuals borrowed from the library, studied the recoil of others, the way Brielle planted her feet like a dancer, anchoring her fury. But Cassie brought no fury, only precision. Brielle noticed. She always noticed. "What's her deal?" she muttered one day, wiping down her custom rifle. "Girl doesn't blink." "She's focused," someone offered. "She's creepy," Brielle shot back. Cassie didn't respond. She heard it all but let it slide off her like rain on glass. Until one day, a new voice broke through. "Nice grouping." She turned. A man stood at the edge of her lane, hands tucked into his jacket. Late 30s, clean-shaven, dark uniform under his coat. Briarfield Police. "Officer Damon," he said with a nod. "You're new around here." Cassie offered a tight smile. "Just trying to learn." "You're doing more than that." His gaze wasn't hostile, just curious. "You military?" "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. Damon studied her for a second longer, then nodded and moved on. Cassie lowered her rifle, her palms suddenly damp. That night, her dreams returned. She was 13 again, a cabin in the woods. Nails hammered across the windows, her wrists raw from the rope. The shadowy figure, his voice slow and calm like a bedtime story. "Don't scream. No one's coming." She jolted awake, breath shallow, throat tight. Her fingers instinctively curled around the edge of her pillow, like it was the barrel of a rifle. She sat up in the darkness. Officer Damon's face flickered in her mind. Too kind, too curious. Cassie exhaled slowly. She couldn't afford to draw attention. Not now. Not when she was this close. At the range the next day, she fired again. The shot rang true. And from lane 1, Brielle finally turned her head. Just once, but long enough. Cassie smiled, just a little. Saturday came cold and clear. The weekend match was a local event, but the room buzzed like it mattered more. Everyone showed up, a dozen shooters, Brielle front and center, strutting like it was already hers. Cassie stayed near the edge. No fanfare, no friends, just her rifle, the one she'd saved for with tips from her part-time job at the diner. Matte black, worn grip, reliable. "Cassie Winters," the announcer called. She stepped up to the firing line, took a deep breath, and aimed. 20 shots, 20 strikes. No missed targets. No hesitation. The room fell into stunned silence, until someone muttered, "She beat Brielle's last record." Brielle's jaw clenched before the official scores were even posted. She stormed to the whiteboard, eyes narrowing at the numbers. Cassie, 198. Brielle, 192. A low whistle slid through the crowd. Laughter. Not cruel, just surprised. But Brielle heard it like a siren. Later, in the hallway near the locker room, she cornered Cassie. "What are you trying to prove?" she spat, blocking her path. Cassie tilted her head, gaze steady. "Nothing. I just shot." "You think you're better than me?" Cassie didn't blink. "I don't think about you." And then, that smile. Small. Barely there. But Brielle saw it, felt it, and walked off with fists clenched tight. That night, under a rain-streaked sky, the cops found Brielle's Mustang keyed and covered in black spray paint. The windshield smashed. On the hood, a single word. Fake. Officer Damon arrived on scene just past midnight. "She's been making enemies," the local deputy muttered. "Not like this," Damon said, his tone measured. He returned to the station and opened his computer. He searched Cassie Winters again. Not the public records this time, but the deeper files. Redacted lines, black bars, juvenile seal. He leaned back. "Who are you?" he whispered. Back in her apartment, a tiny one-bedroom above a thrift shop, Cassie ran her fingers over a torn envelope. No return address, no handwriting, just printed words, cut from newspaper headlines and glued one by one. "You shouldn't have come back." She read it 3 times. Her hands didn't shake. Instead, she stood, locked the door, pulled down the shades, and opened the small wooden box hidden beneath her bed. Inside, old photos, a map, and a folded paper marked with red X's. Her fingers hovered over one photo, a man in his 40s, smiling with a shotgun slung over his shoulder. She burned it in the sink. At the range the next morning, Brielle was there early, polishing her scope like it was a weapon of war. Cassie nodded at her. Brielle didn't respond. The tension between them felt like flint and steel, just one strike away from ignition. Damon stood by the back wall, arms crossed, watching. Cassie didn't look at him, but she knew. She always knew when someone was starting to dig. Cassie stood at the firing line, her breath steady, eyes fixed on the target. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the range, each shot a testament to her precision. Around her, murmurs of admiration and disbelief filled the air. She had qualified for the finals. Brielle watched from a distance, her jaw tight, fingers clenched around her phone. The messages had started a week ago, anonymous texts with photos of her asleep, her trophies, her locked gun cabinet, each image more invasive than the last. At the police station, Officer Damon sat at his desk, a file open before him. Cassie Winters. The name had led him down a path of sealed juvenile records and missing persons reports. One name stood out: Marcus Hale, a former shooting instructor who had vanished 2 years prior. Cassie had trained under him briefly. He called her in for questioning. "I didn't kill him," Cassie said, her voice calm but firm. "I just watched." Damon leaned forward. "Watched what, exactly?" She looked away, her eyes distant. Watched him disappear. That night, Brielle received another message. A video this time. Her bedroom, the camera panning slowly across her sleeping form. She screamed, dropping the phone. The next morning, Cassie arrived at the range, her expression unreadable. She noticed the whispers, the sideways glances. She ignored them, focusing on her practice. Damon approached her, his face serious. "We need to talk," he said. Cassie nodded, following him to a quiet corner. "Marcus Hale," he began. "You trained under him?" "For a short time," she replied. "He went missing 2 years ago." "I know. Do you know what happened to him?" Cassie hesitated. "He was a predator. He hurt people. He hurt me." Damon's eyes narrowed. "And? I confronted him. He ran. I never saw him again." Back at her apartment, Cassie found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single photo, her standing over Marcus Hale, a rifle in her hands. She stared at it, her hands trembling. The past was catching up to her. The championship finals buzzed with anticipation. Spectators filled the stands, their murmurs blending into a low hum of excitement. Cassie stood at her lane, her rifle cradled with practiced ease. Across from her, Brielle adjusted her gear, her eyes flicking towards Cassie with a mix of disdain and unease. The announcer's voice echoed through the range, signaling the start. Cassie inhaled deeply, steadying her nerves. The first shot rang out, clean, precise. Then another, and another. Each competitor matched the other's pace, the tension mounting with every pull of the trigger. Suddenly, a sharp crack pierced the air, distinct from the controlled gunfire. A scream followed, drawing gasps from the crowd. All eyes turned to Brielle, who stood frozen, her rifle smoking and a look of shock plastered across her face. Officials rushed in, examining the weapon. "It's been tampered with," one announced grimly. "Deliberate sabotage." Whispers rippled through the audience, and accusatory glances fell upon Cassie. She remained silent, her expression unreadable. Later that evening, Officer Damon arrived at Cassie's apartment, a warrant in hand. Inside, he discovered a collection of maps, journals, and newspaper clippings detailing the disappearance of Marcus Hale, Cassie's former instructor. The meticulous notes and annotations painted a picture of obsession. But as Damon examined the materials, a detail caught his eye: the handwriting. It didn't match Cassie's. He retrieved samples from her previous statements and compared them. The difference was undeniable. A closer look at the journals revealed subtle hints: references to Brielle's routines, her achievements, and veiled expressions of envy. The realization hit Damon like a punch to the gut. Back at the range, security footage was reviewed. One clip showed Brielle entering the storage area alone the night before the finals, her actions suspicious. Damon confronted Brielle with the evidence. Cornered, she broke down. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to scare her, to make her leave." Cassie, informed of the developments, sat quietly as Damon relayed the truth. The weight of suspicion lifted, but the scars remained. The next day, the championship resumed. Cassie stepped onto the range, the crowd watching in hushed anticipation. She took her position, exhaled slowly, and fired. A perfect shot. The auditorium pulsed with anticipation. Cassie stood at the podium, the championship trophy gleaming in her hands. The crowd erupted into applause, but her eyes scanned the room, searching for a familiar face. Brielle was nowhere to be seen. Moments later, chaos erupted at the back of the hall. Two officers escorted Brielle in handcuffs, her face contorted with rage. She screamed, "She doesn't deserve it!" "She's a killer." Gasps filled the room as reporters swarmed the scene. Cassie remained still, her grip tightening on the trophy. At the police station, Brielle sat across from Officer Damon, her eyes wild. "You don't understand," she hissed. "She watched my brother die. She did nothing." Damon leaned forward, his voice calm. "Your brother was Marcus Hale?" Brielle nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He was everything to me, and she let him die." Damon sighed, placing a folder on the table. "We found your journals, the maps, the clippings. You've been stalking Cassie for months." Brielle's eyes widened. "I had to. She needed to pay." Back at her apartment, Cassie sat alone, the trophy on the table before her. She stared at it, memories flooding back. The cabin, Marcus's twisted smile, the fear. She had been just a girl, powerless. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Damon entered, his expression soft. "It's over," he said. Cassie nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Is it?" He sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You've faced your past. You've won." She looked at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. "But at what cost?" Damon offered a small smile. "Sometimes justice comes with pain, but it's still justice." Cassie took a deep breath, standing and lifting the trophy. "Then it's time to move forward." Together, they walked out into the night, leaving the shadows behind.